So good evening everyone, it's 5:30, so we'll make a start now, and welcome to today's planning meeting of the 10th of November 2025. I'd like to welcome members of the public, councillors and officers to this meeting, and I'll now call upon the clerk who will advise how the meeting will run this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Please note that we are live streaming this meeting via the Council's YouTube channel to encourage more people to engage in our public meetings. The proceedings of the meeting will also be recorded. Please can I remind everyone to use their microphones when speaking and turn them off when finished. Please can attendees in person also refrain from watching the live stream as this will cause interference for our viewers. Please ensure that your mobile phones and iPads or other devices are turned to silent. We're not expecting a fire alarm today. In the event of evacuation, please leave by the nearest exit and gather in the car park next to the library opposite Tesco's. Should members of the public need to use the facilities, they are located through the doors to the right of the security guard. In accordance with the Constitution, members of the public who have registered to speak will be permitted to do so when invited by the Chair. Please note that registered speakers are not permitted to approach committee members or distribute documentation to the committee during the course of this meeting. Each application will be dealt with in the following order. The planning officer will present the submitted application and will outline the proposed recommendation in full. Any speakers registered to speak on the application will be invited to address the committee. This will be taken in the following order. Speakers against, neighbourhood forum representatives, any councillors who are not members of the committee and have registered in advance, followed by speakers in support of the application. All speakers will have a maximum of 5 minutes each to address the meeting. This will be followed by questions from members and responses from the planning officer. Once questions from the committee have concluded, the Chair will open the application for debate. At the conclusion of the debate, the Chair will seek a proposer and seconder for the application. The proposal must be in full and include all information such as conditions or reasons. The Chair will then confirm with the planning officer if they wish to enter into a period of summing up. Members, if at any point you leave the meeting for any reason during the consideration of an application, you will be unable to vote on that application. Thank you, Chair. I hand back to yourself.
Thank you very much. Lisa, can I just check, have any apologies or update on the membership of the committee?
So we've received apologies from Councillors Verdi and Councillor Strang. They are being represented today by Councillor George Darling and Councillor Spigania.
Thank you. Just turning now to the minutes from the committee held on the 15th of September 2025. Colleagues, can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Pentney, seconder. Councillor Tolchard. All those in favour?
That's carried, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on now to declarations of interest. First of all, members of the planning committee, do you have any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests on any of the items of today's agenda? Please raise your hand. Thank you. And same questions to officers here. Have you any pecuniary or non-pecuniary interests on items on today? Thank you. And finally, Lisa, any urgent items?
I'm not aware of any, Chair.
Thank you. Excellent. So we'll move on to the meat of this evening. The first item, which is number 5. This is to consider an application for Singleton Gardens, Meadfoot Street, Sea Road, Torquay, planning reference P/2025/0423. The clerk has confirmed those who have registered to speak upon entry to the meeting. I will therefore ask Verity Clark to introduce the application.
Thank you. So the application site is Singleton Gardens, which featured a residential dwelling with an associated garden on the northern side of Meadfoot Sea Road in Torquay. The property was a 2-storey dwelling which was modest in scale and set within a large plot. So the site featured stone and rendered boundary walls, and the land rises from the south to the north. So the site is located within an existing residential area, is designated as flood zone 1, is situated within the Lincoln's conservation area and is subject to an area tree preservation order. Within the Lincoln's conservation area map, an extract of which is currently on the screen, the dwelling, greenhouse and an outbuilding are noted as other key buildings of architectural importance which make a significant contribution to the townscape. The site is also adjacent to Singleton, which is Grade 2 listed, and Palm Grove, which is also Grade 2 listed, and is located on the opposite side of Meadfoot Sea Road. And to the northwest, there's the nearby Meadfoot Lodge and Wall and Gate Piers, which is to the west of Meadfoot Lodge, which are Grade 2 listed. So the listed buildings are shown on blue on the map. So this is an aerial photo of the site. So you can see Meadfoot Sea Road runs to the south of the application site. So householder planning application P/2023/0994 was granted consent on the 5th of March 2024 for alterations to the existing dwelling, which included the demolition of existing extensions, formation of two-storey and single-storey extensions, roof alterations and replacement fenestration. So demolition of the greenhouse and outbuilding, landscaping and associated works. So works to implement this consent took place within the required timescales. However, on the 18th of April 2025, the Council was made aware of works to the site that exceeded those allowed via this consent. And these works included the partial demolition of the original dwelling house. So contrary to the planning permission, the unlawful partial demolition of the original dwelling house has taken place, rather than just the extensions and external walls that were specifically authorised by the consent. So the Council's position is, therefore, that given the planning permission did not, within its operative part, authorise the relevant demolition, the planning permission has not survived and is no longer implementable. So just as an update to members, one additional letter of representation has been received. This does not raise any additional issues not already covered in the committee report. So the site currently features a partially demolished residential dwelling and adjoining boundary wall to Meadfoot Sea Road. So this plan shows the existing site layout pre the demolition works. So you can see that the existing dwelling was located in the southwest corner of the plot and was built into the boundary walls. The plot included a number of disused buildings, including a greenhouse which has now been demolished, and there is an existing vehicular access at the southeast corner off of Meadfoot Sea Road. So this next plan shows the existing floor plans and elevations of the dwelling on site prior to the demolition. So the dwelling featured two storeys and included two single-storey flat roof elements. The two-storey section of the dwelling featured a pitched hipped roof and a two-storey flat roof section. The existing openings were UPVC. So the plan now showing is the proposed floor plans and elevations. So this application follows on from the approved application P/2023/0994, which permitted alterations and extensions to the existing dwelling. The consent also allowed the demolition of the greenhouse and the outbuilding with landscaping and associated works. So the current application is seeking to regularise the unauthorised partial demolition of the original dwelling house, including a boundary wall facing Meadfoot Sea Road, and seeks consent for the construction of a replacement dwelling. The application also seeks consent for retrospective demolition of the greenhouse and the demolition of the outbuilding, which were previously approved but no longer authorised, given the previous consent authorising this is no longer implementable. So the key differences between the previously approved application and the current application is the partial demolition of the original dwelling and wall facing Meadfoot Sea Road and the rebuilding of the dwelling using modern materials and methods. The wall facing Meadfoot Sea Road will be rebuilt using reclaimed stone where suitable, and externally the footprint of the replacement dwelling is the same as the works approved under the previous consent, as is the height of the building and the roof form. Windows and doors are detailed in the same location. Internally the layout remains the same, with the exception of the location of the first floor ensuite bathrooms, along with other minor internal changes such as the location of internal doors. So this is the proposed block plan, so you can see the proposed development within the context of the adjacent block of flats at Meadville. The garage block serving the adjacent flats at Meadville is included, and you can see that the replacement dwelling will not extend further north than this structure. So the proposal also includes landscaping works, which will include the removal of an existing low wall and area of concrete adjacent to the dwelling, which will be replaced by flagstone slabs and a larger area of lawn. So the greenhouse and outbuilding, which will be demolished, are shown on this plan in dashed black outline, and the greenhouse has already been demolished. So the following slides just quickly showing you the comparisons between the approved householder application and the current proposal, just to allow for easy comparison. So on the left is the approved ground and first floor plans, and then on the right is the currently proposed floor plans. So now we've got the top set of elevations now showing are the approved eastern elevation, and then the bottom elevation is the currently proposed east elevation. The top set of elevations are the approved north and south elevations with the corresponding currently proposed elevations below. And then just lastly for comparisons, the top plan is the approved site layout plan and the bottom plan is showing the currently proposed site layout plan. So the following are photos taken of the site, with the first set just showing the site prior to the works taking place on site. So this image was taken from Meadfoot Road, so you can just see the existing vehicular access on the right hand side of the image. In the background you can see the block of flats, Meadville, and you can see the dwelling, how it appeared before it was demolished. So this image was also taken from Meadfoot Road. You can see the side of the existing dwelling, which was built into the front boundary wall, and then we've got the prominent street tree. Got this image which is showing the garage block serving the adjacent block of flats at Meadville. You can just see the pitched roof and the flat roof of the dwelling behind that garage block. So this was the eastern elevation of the dwelling with the boundary wall of Meadfoot Road visible on the left. And then this image shows the greenhouse which has been demolished with the end of the dwelling visible on the left hand side. And then you've got Meadville visible at the centre of the image behind the shared boundary wall. So then we've got the following images which are taken following the demolition works on site. So this image is taken from Meadfoot Road. Got this image which shows the level of demolition and is looking towards the southern boundary wall and Meadfoot Road. And then we've got this image which is looking towards the western boundary shared with Meadville. So lastly, in terms of images, this is looking just again towards the western boundary with Meadville, but it shows the single-storey outbuilding, which is also proposed to be demolished. So this slide just now lists the key material considerations, which are considered in detail in the committee report. So in terms of principle, the committee report confirms that in the context of development within the built-up area, there are no development plan policies indicating that the proposal is not acceptable in principle. In terms of the design, visual appearance and character of the area, the replacement dwelling detailed is considered to result in an acceptable size scale and visual appearance. The two-storey flat roof element present on the dwelling prior to the demolition was considered to result in a poor visual appearance, and the use of two pitched roofs on the proposed replacement dwelling is considered to appear visually coherent. The lower pitched roof will sit adjacent to Meadfoot Road, as the dwelling did prior to the demolition works, and a stepping up of height further into the plot is considered to be an acceptable design rationale. The dwelling in situ prior to the demolition works featured a single-storey flat roof element on the eastern front elevation, and in its place the replacement dwelling will feature a single-storey pitched roof element. This appears subordinate to the main two-storey elements of the building, and the design as a whole is considered to result in an acceptable visual appearance. So moving on to heritage, the site is located within the Lincoln's conservation area, and there are a number of Grade 2 listed buildings located in the vicinity. So the proposed demolition of the greenhouse and outbuilding structure are considered to be acceptable given their low level of special interest and historic fabric. The Council's Principal Historic Environment Officer has considered the proposal in detail and has concluded that the proposal as a whole will result in a mixture of a neutral impact and an enhancement to non-designated heritage asset of Singleton Gardens, and the heritage assets of the Lincoln's Conservation Area and Palm Grove. The loss of historic fabric in situ within a non-designated heritage asset is regrettable, but in this particular case, it's justified through the supporting structural information provided and the sensitive rebuilding of the structure reusing existing materials where possible. This would, on balance, have a neutral impact and would result in the character and appearance of the conservation area being conserved. The use of an appropriately specified and finished lime render to the external face of the boundary wall to replace the existing cement render is considered to be an enhancement, and as a result there is no objections from an historic environment perspective. The officer does recommend a planning condition requiring a sample panel and details of mix for the proposed render finish for the south elevation wall to ensure a good quality finish, which has been recommended, and a planning condition is also recommended to secure the joinery, fenestration, slate and paving slabs detailed. So in terms of amenity issues, the committee report confirms that the proposal is considered to have an acceptable impact on all surrounding properties and future occupiers. In terms of drainage and flood risk, the site is located within a critical drainage area and surface water will be dealt with via infiltration. The Council's drainage engineer has considered the proposal and has confirmed, with the addition of a condition, the proposal is acceptable. So from a highways and parking perspective, the proposal is considered to be acceptable, subject to the recommended conditions. So moving on to ecology issues, the DCC ecologist has considered the information submitted by the applicant's consultant ecologist and has confirmed that the addition of conditions, the proposal is acceptable. In terms of issues relating to trees, the Council's senior tree officer has confirmed that the proposal will have an acceptable impact on trees. A tree protection plan and arboricultural method statement have been produced, which will need to be adhered to. So the committee report considers all the issues mentioned in depth, and when weighing up the proposal against the relevant policies noted on this slide, in addition to the MPPF, it is concluded that the proposal accords with the local plan, the neighbourhood plan and the MPPF. So the officer recommendation is therefore that of conditional approval, subject to the conditions as outlined in the committee report, with a final drafting of conditions delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency. The resolution of any new material considerations that may come to light following Planning Committee to be delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency, including the addition of any necessary further planning conditions or obligations. And finally, if members of the Planning Committee are minded to refuse the application against officer recommendation, the final drafting of the reasons will be delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing and Climate Emergency and in consultation with the chairperson. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Clark. I now call on Mr David Redman on behalf of the Civic Society to address the meeting against the application. Mr Redman, you have 5 minutes and the clerk will let you know when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. Dear Councillors, the Civic Society's view regarding this application is that it is actually a confection. The officer's approval states the neutral impact and considered enhancement, but do developers create neutral impact? We've had national outcry with Singleton, BBC, with Herald front page, and so is neutral actually willful destruction helpful to the town? In terms of the civic position, no. Developers, is the destruction of Singleton relevant to the planning policy context? Section 31, paragraph 6. The report is condoned by officers because, according to it, it preserves or enhances. Section 72, preserve and enhance. Section 66, special regard to the preserving. Ladies and gentlemen, preserving, according to Wikipedia, is maintain in its original state. There is a use of the word partial by the clerk. That is actually incorrect. It has been entirely demolished willfully. Do developers regenerate the town? Not in Wellswood. That is why our ward councillor is here to support the community, and we support her. Singleton had permission. This permission was granted by this council, and he had it. So what happened? The same as what happened at the palace. You grant them permission and they abuse that permission. Developers are perverting the law, and the pettifoggers and the perversion of the law is the reason for England's decline. Look at the Crooked House pub in Dudley. It is exactly the same issue. The architect suggests a perilous state. No wonder, 2 huge diggers were brought. So actually he then says unauthorised demolition. Well, it's a contradiction from the architect. The engineer's report states the 3rd of April the work began. This is a lie. The report is a false statement. It was over the Easter weekend on the 18th. We all know that. Sensitive has been used by Verity Clark, but it isn't sensitive because it's bullying. It is bullying the community, it is bullying the council, and the Housing Act, section 72, says any harm should require clear justification. What is the justification for a building that no longer exists? The NPPF requires conservation areas to enhance or better reveal their significance. No Palace Hotel, no Garden Cottage, no heritage, no Torquay. The officer states the loss is regrettable, but then goes to the engineer's report. It's a lie, Verity. The engineer's report is not a mistake. It is done deliberately to take attention away from the fact it was done over Easter bank holiday. Civic pride. With the council and the community, what have developers done? It is greed that they are actually focused on. The condition the officer puts, point 1, not to be done on Saturdays, Sundays or bank holidays. He did all of that already. Point 6, no burning on site. He's been doing that for 5 years, and the people in Meadville have been severely affected by products being burnt on the site. How is the statement going to be strictly adhered to? Osmosis? Because this is somebody who is out of control in the planning situation because he thinks the law, civic law and criminal law, does not affect him. The enforcement notice is for a complete rebuild. The heritage officer is stating that it actually has a neutral impact. What? Demolishing an asset has a neutral impact. That's amazing. The tree, T7, any roots must be protected. Well, good luck, because the inspectorate brought the tree to everyone's attention and that stopped the block of flats nobody wanted either. So protecting these roots is going to be perilous, and actually if he destroys the tree, it will die. Economic role of development, a driver of the economy. Adam Hamed, the family that face Singleton Gardens, have lost £40,000 in revenue because of the state of it. What has the Coppice Hotel closure caused?
Mr. Redmond,
what has the Palace caused?
40 seconds now.
Thank you. They all had permission. Let the inspectorate decide. Stick to the enforcement notice. Do not give an opportunity to an opportunist. Look at the track record. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you, Mr. Redmond. I now call on Mike Cowdrey on behalf of the Torbay Neighbourhood Forum. As you're aware, Mr. Cowdrey, you have 5 minutes and the clerk will let you know when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you. Good evening. This statement has been reviewed and approved by the steering group of the Torquay Neighbourhood Forum. The Forum believes that this decision should be deferred until the Planning Inspectorate has issued their findings on all the other planning matters. P2025/0423 is the latest in a confusing series of applications for the site. The legal letter for the application states the application is for full planning permission. The planning officer has established it's actually partially retrospective. The application form states that work started on the 24th of April. It actually started a week before. The application seeks permission for the partial demolition of the existing dwelling house. In fact, the whole of the cottage was demolished. The Design, Access and Heritage Statement says that during consented demolition work, the remaining walls were in a perilous state. Therefore, the building team chose to demolish them. It was unfortunate that this perilous state had not previously been identified when preparing the earlier planning applications. It was also unfortunate that this discovery only came to light over the 4-day Easter weekend when it was impossible to contact council planning officers. But since heavy demolition machinery pre-arranged in advance, was already on site, demolition just went ahead anyway. The cottage had been identified as a key building within the Lincoln's conservation area. Its unauthorised demolition is a breach of the law. The community was shocked and outraged. After local outcry, and thanks to councillor intervention, a stop notice followed by an enforcement notice were issued. Essentially, the enforcement notice required reconstruction of the building in its entirety in a similar manner as possible to the building as stood immediately prior to the application. Reinstatement of a wall, and in the meantime for the materials to be retained on site. This application is to allow reconstruction of the cottage as it would have been had application 0994 been properly implemented. This is the latest in a succession of applications and appeals for redevelopment of the site. 2 earlier applications for a block of flats were refused and an appeal dismissed. Subsequently, 2023/0994 was approved, but this permission can no longer be implemented because the cottage is gone. Enforcement notices 2025/0093 were issued. This is yet to be fulfilled. Appeal 2023/0033 was lodged against those notices, and this has yet to be determined. Application 2025/0365 was lodged, which the council has wisely refused to validate. This is now subject to appeal 2025/0038. Finally, there is this application, which does nothing but sow further confusion on an already muddled series of applications and appeals. The forum also notes separate applications by this developer P2025/0362 and 0363. These were for the replacement and improvements of a part-collapsed boundary wall on Lincoln Drive. This wall is also in the conservation area and was also demolished without permission. It was improperly reconstructed and included an unauthorised vehicle entranceway. This further illustrates a lack of respect for the law and for the planning process. So on the face of it, 2025/0423 is a straightforward application for reconstruction of a cottage. But the forum believes that this matter should be deferred until the Planning Inspectorate has issued their findings on the other matters. If the committee proceeds to approval, there is a risk of conflict between the findings of the local planning authority and the planning inspector, leading to further confusion. Finally, the Neighbourhood Forum is adamant that this application shall not in any way predetermine consideration of any subsequent planning appeals for the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cowdery. I now call on Councillor Hazel Foster to address the meeting. Councillor Foster, you have 5 minutes, and the clerk will let you know when you have 1 minute remaining.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. Can I firstly thank you all for allowing this planning application to come to the planning committee this evening for this decision. So I am speaking to object to this planning application. This application should be refused or at least delayed until after the appeal against the enforcement notice is known. My reasons are all included in the report, which I will not repeat, but I do urge the Planning Committee to please take note of the points I have raised as they decide on their decision. But I do wish to make a few comments. The Planning Committee will be aware that Singleton Gardens was completely demolished over the Easter weekend, not partially demolished as in the report, as also been highlighted. And this was on the Good Friday, so some of the dates are not quite right. It was the Good Friday. It was the Friday lunchtime when I phoned up the Torbay Council and spoke to the emergency officer on duty that day to tell them about the property that had been demolished. So, as far as the history of how it all came to be demolished, can I ask the committee to note on page 37, where in the application, the structural report, which is to support the planning application, where it does say that apparently at that Easter weekend, the developers, engineers looked at the building and gave advice regarding the wall of the property as it presented a real danger to users of the highway. How convenient that a demolition team was on site to immediately demolish the building. No time to notify Torbay Council's planning department. No time to put up safety barriers along the pavement or the road that were only a few feet away from the property. No time to put a demolition management plan in place. No time even for a second opinion on its condition. This was a building of heritage significance within the Lincoln's conservation area and much valued by the local community. The enforcement notice to rebuild the property was the right decision, and I praise the planning department for taking that decision. Can I now ask you to look on page 27 with reference to Torbay Council's own legal definition regarding the application, stating that this application is valid. Yet, if you notice on the last sentence where it talks of that, it does say, if this application is approved, it would not result in any requirement for the works to be carried out. So, in other words, approval of the application does not confirm the building work would take place. The footings can be built, and that could result in the site being left derelict for many, many years. Torbay Council has its house building targets, yet here is a property that should be a family home, not a blank piece of derelict land. Torbay Council's enforcement notice is for Singleton Cottage and Singleton Gardens to be rebuilt with its approved extension using the original building materials by early 2027. That's just approximately 15 months to go. This is what residents of Torbay who are here this evening, this is what they want to see. This family home up and built. That can be achieved, Planning Committee, by a refusal of this planning application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. I now call on Anne Hodson to address the meeting in support of the application. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you.
And the clerk will let you know when you have 1 minute left. Thank you.
Singleton Gardens was a private sale with no restrictive or developmental covenants. In 2024, this committee unanimously granted planning permission for the derelict cottage to be renovated and made habitable again. When works commenced recently, an unforeseen structural issue occurred when the wall on Meadfoot Sea Road abutting the cottages began to crumble and became dangerously unstable. I witnessed this. Sections of the wall and adjoining structure were removed to prevent injury. All other work stopped. A Ray Bishop was advised that no alternative course was viable. The owner of the building company, who was on site, told me that his priority was the safety of his workers and the public using the pavement. Safety was the sole decisive factor.
1 moment, please. I'd ask the people in the audience to respect the speaker as much as you were respected when you spoke. If I have any more such actions, I'm going to ask whoever's doing it to leave the room. We need proper respect for all speakers as we listen, and the councillors can do their adjudication accordingly. Thank you.
I'm grateful. The owner of the building company, who was on site, told me that his priority was the safety of his workers and the public using the pavement. Safety was the sole decisive factor. Ray Bishop instructed a structural engineer. Immediately the structural failure became apparent. He also informed the local authority, promising to faithfully rebuild the affected sections according to your council's approved design. The resulting appearance will match the scheme you granted in 2024, resolving the structural weaknesses. Construction projects sometimes reveal unforeseen structural issues, making the original plan impossible to complete exactly as drawn, particularly with older properties. Section 73 of the Town and County Planning Act also anticipates such circumstances and allows plans to be adjusted while preserving the original intent. This is the situation we have here and nothing more. Some objectors claim the wall was intentionally demolished to enable more profitable development. This is both untrue and actionable in defamation. Some oppose reconstruction works altogether, yet the cottage was and is structurally unsound and uninhabitable. To leave the cottage as it stands contradicts your previous approval, which cannot be right. Some objectors argue that the garden should be open to the public, but this was never a condition of sale. There have been numerous requests by the objectors to deem the land an asset of community value, to nominate the land as a local green space under the neighbourhood plan. 2 requests to English Heritage for listing, all previously made and firmly rejected because it is private land. Historic England also refuses to identify the garden as one of special historic value. So these are irrelevant arguments. This application is not an opportunity for the objectors to try to reverse the original consent and have a second bite of the planning cherry. So I ask you to look beyond those who've parroted objections without examining the true facts and engage in unforgivable personal hostility. This application ensures the cottage will be restored safely, sympathetically, and in line with the conservation area's heritage value, and in accordance with your committee's previous unanimous approval, which the planning officer's recommendations to this committee is today. The simple fact remains that preventing the applicant from rebuilding the property as described, and most importantly in accordance with the approved design, is in no one's interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hodson. So, committee members, now invite questions to our planning officer. Please, may I remind members, questions should only cover matters not raised in the presentation. Any questions? Councillor Fox.
In relation to the enforcement action that's ongoing, I wonder whether the officer could just very briefly explain the relationship between that enforcement action and the application that is before us. Thank you.
So a stop notice was served initially for the site when the demolition was taking place. Since then a enforcement notice has been served requiring the rebuilding of the property as it was originally standing. That required the existing materials to be retained on site and to be used. So that's currently under appeal at the moment. This application has come in and it is separate, so it's asking to rebuild the property as per the proposed plans. So whilst the two are running concurrently, they don't actually prejudice each other because the enforcement notice could not ask for the property to be rebuilt in any way other than what it was standing before. So it has to be rebuilt, otherwise that would go beyond the scope of the enforcement action, because that would be requiring them to do something that needed the benefit of planning permission. So that's where the enforcement sort of side of things are. We've got an application in front of us which is asking for planning consent, partially retrospective. The two do not prejudice each other. Does that help to clear things up? That's kind of highlighted in the officer report, and explains why the legal advice is that you can determine this application.
Could I just ask one further question, Chair? And that is on the question of partial or total demolition. You've heard some challenges in the room about it being not partial. Can I just have your view as to why you consider it to be partial rather than total?
Yeah, sure. I'll just take you back to some photos. So we took legal advice on this matter. The advice was that it is not full demolition because there are existing walls being retained, mainly that wall which is shared with Meadville. So that if that wall had also gone, then you would potentially say it was full demolition, but that wall is remaining, so our legal advice was that it is, and we can only call it partial demolition.
Councillor Penny.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks to the officer for the report. My question being that if you had known, or if things had been different, and you had if we had the result of the appeal against the enforcement known to us before today, is it foreseeable to you that the findings of that appeal would materially change the contents of your report in any way?
No.
Councillor Billings.
Thanks, Chair. Ms Clark, the point that's been advocated in the speakers earlier was that this application should be refused. Councillor Foster made it very clear that the previously approved dwelling should be rebuilt in accordance with an enforcement notice. Could you set out to me what the practical difference between building this building, if this application is approved, and rebuilding the previous building that was on site in accordance with the enforcement notice? What would be the practical difference between those two, please?
So I'll take you to the existing plans. So enforcement notice is asking it to be rebuilt in accordance with what we've got on the screen now, which is how it looked previously before demolition. The planning application in front of us is looking for it to be rebuilt as per the plans on our screen. Just to note though, if this application is subsequently approved, there would not be a requirement for them to actually build out that development. That is why the enforcement notice is still running, which is our legal mechanism to make them rebuild something on the site.
So, in practical terms, the substantive difference is if this committee consents the proposal we have in front of us, what would be built on site would be consistent with the application that the committee previously approved, whereas if we go down the enforcement route, we can only, as a council, enforce the rebuilding of the building that was previously there before any amendments are undertaken to it.
Yep, that's correct.
And Chair, final question, if I may, please. In your answer to Councillor Fox, you referred to part retrospective. That was a point that was made by the Neighbourhood Forum, who referred both to the partial demolition and full demolition, and also the fact that this was, in their view, a retrospective application because it's already been demolished. Is that clearly set out as far as it needs to be in the application form and in your report, and does it make any further substantive difference on that point, please?
I'm satisfied that all necessary procedure has been undertaken.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other? Councillor Darling? George?
Thank you, Chair. On page 17, on the impact on significance of heritage assets, it includes quite a lot of points on what I wonder are confounders, things that have already been approved in the past or undertaken. I'm just trying to work out with all of them and looking at some and looking at the greenhouse and outbuilding, so how many of them are actually unique to this application and how many of them are already in place on the previous application?
So I think the main difference is where it says demolition and rebuilding of the original parts of the dwelling and associated boundary wall.
And if I may follow up, Chair, if that's the only significant difference, it's being assessed as being neutral. So could you please dig into the kind of neutral aspect of that a bit more and how you came to that conclusion?
I'll just ask my colleague, Rob Palmer, just to answer that. He's our Principal Historic Environment Officer.
Yeah, Rob.
Thank you. Yes, Rob Palmer, Principal Historic Environment Officer. That is the major thing we're considering in regards to differences between the original approval. We can see here it's got a neutral impact, but with a moderate degree of impact. The reasoning being neutral is that you have the structural information which supports and gives the justification as to why that building needed to be partially demolished. If that is the case, then the best conservation practice is to rebuild in a like-for-like manner as much as possible using reclaimed materials, which is what the application specifies. So that is the reason why, although it is regrettable that you've lost historic fabric in situ, it's rebuilding its justification to why it had to be demolished, and rebuilding, reusing those materials is the reason why it's a neutral impact.
Councillor Spicania.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up a point that Councillor Foster made regarding page 27 in the LPA's assessment that the determination of this application can and should be proceed, and this will not prejudice the ongoing enforcement appeal. It should be noted that if the application is approved, it would not result in any requirement for the work to be carried out. Can I have clarification on that point, please?
So if this application is approved, there'll be no requirement for them to undertake these works?
None at all.
Not via this planning consent. That's why there's the separate mechanism of the enforcement, which is asking them or requires them to rebuild as per, well, these plans that I've now got shown back on the screen, which was how it looked before any of the demolition works. And as I've explained, that's as far as the enforcement action could go, because to make them rebuild in line with what we've got proposed now would be beyond the scope, because that would require planning permission.
Thank you.
Councillor Millings.
Sorry, Chair. Final question, Ms. Clark. The common theme in relation to speakers was we want to get this resolved. We want to get something done on the site. This committee's previously reduced timescales on approvals. We've done it on outline applications. I don't believe we've done it on a detailed application. Could we, instead of a standard 3-year time condition, put a 2-year one? I appreciate that wouldn't be the mechanism to get it built, but in terms of commencement, could we reduce the timescale? Would that be reasonable, do you think?
Well, technically they've already commenced by doing the demolition works, so I don't think that would really work, I'm afraid.
Thank you.
Councillor Tolchard.
Thank you, Chair. Can we just talk about the reuse of the existing materials from the demolished building? Can I just be clear, does that just relate to the rebuilding of the wall, or does it relate to the rebuilding of the actual house? Can other materials be used to rebuild the dwelling?
So there's 2 recommended planning conditions. The first relates, it's condition number 2 on page 48, relates to the external materials of the house, and that says, prior to the construction of the external walls of the dwelling, sample panels of all the new facing walls should be provided on site, detailing the mix for the proposed render finish. Approval of the materials and methods should be confirmed in writing to the local planning authority. So that's as far as we've taken it in terms of the materials for the house. The second condition, which is number 3, is the external materials for the wall which faces Meadfoot Sea Road. So that's very similar, but it does also state on there that the wall should be constructed using reclaimed stone where suitable. And those 2 conditions were on the basis of the advice of the Historic Environment Officer.
Thank you very much. And that reclaimed stone can come from elsewhere. If there's not enough left on site, then it can come from elsewhere.
Yes, there's nothing specifying that it has to explicitly be the reused material that's already there. It can be reclaimed from elsewhere.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Mandy Darling.
Thank you. Can I just confirm something about the enforcement? I've got to get my head around this. So, if the enforcement, if the appeal, they lose the appeal, they've got to build it they've got to put it back as it was before. But if we get planning permission on this one, then they can do it as the previous plan permission for. So, if they lost the appeal and had to do it as it was before it was taken down or whatever, could the company then say, well, actually, we've got planning permission, we'll do it like this instead? Are they hedging their bets?
Sorry, Chair, can I step in?
Yes, if you introduce yourself.
Yes, sorry, I'm Elaine Bell, and the legal advisor to the committee. Yes, effectively, there is a choice, essentially. The inspector will give stipulations as to when the work would have to be carried out if the enforcement notice appeal was lost. There'd be a time frame within which they would have to build out. Of course, they'd be mindful, and I'm sure the officers at the enforcement appeal hearing would actually say that there is actually a consent if it were granted this evening. And there would be some, I would imagine, some form of mechanism, perhaps an undertaking from the developer that they will build out, if they wanted to pursue this scheme, within a certain time frame, because what you don't want to have, I assume, is have just footings built or laid and nothing else, which keeps a permission alive and nothing else on site. And so there would be some, I'd imagine, some mechanism to get some assurance for the local planning authority that could be used to get the development built out within a certain time frame, or opt for the inspector's time limited, if they lost the appeal on the enforcement notice, we'd give some time limit to actually build out what was there before the demolition.
Thank you.
And of course, sorry, Chair, I should say that if they did go for this scheme, if it was approved, it would be open to the local planning authority to withdraw the enforcement notice, but it doesn't limit the authority from taking further enforcement action in the event of further breaches.
Councillor George Darling.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to the demolition and the kind of neutral assessment of rebuilding and the kind of position from the structural assessment where there was a partial demolition leading to a structural instability requiring further demolition. It might be beyond the scope of the assessments undertaken, but to what extent do we feel that was inevitable, or was that due to the way it was initially demolished? Is there anything to consider in that, as in, is it the way it was demolished has led to us requiring to consider this further, or is it, should it have been considered as a heritage asset more carefully when that was undertaken, or is that slightly beyond, potentially?
I think that's a little bit beyond the scope of this application, to be honest, and I can't really comment in terms of their method of demolition, because that's not my sort of speciality, I'm afraid.
Well, colleagues, I open up to the debate. Councillor Pentney.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a very kind of unique situation we find ourselves in because of the existing enforcement action. And I think once again we're in one of those situations where I feel, I'll see how the debate plays out, where we are a committee and we have to look at things through a certain lens, but my councillor hat and my frustrations with this authority's approach to planning, approach to enforcement, or an often lack of, really frustrates me, and I can have a lot of sympathy with a lot of the speakers, and the circumstances of this application, it touches upon that nerve within me, but also at the moment I can't see much policy-wise, as much as I'm frustrated, much policy-wise with this application that we need to tear apart if we've got a problem with it. So I'll stop there and look forward to the rest of the debate.
Councillor Billings.
I would observe, Chair, that in the last budget settlement, not that it's relevant for this application, but just following that comment, recognising this meeting on public record, that additional money was put in to the enforcement team, and we've now got more enforcement officers, and that the backlog is going in the correct direction. But returning the debate back to the application we have in front of us, what I think is important is to understand what actually, in terms of policy terms, is appropriately applied to the application we have before us. We have a very clear report from the officer, and the common theme, as I spoke about earlier, in all of the speakers, is that we need to get this site back to a regularised position where there's a dwelling on the site that is capable of housing a local family, and the site no longer looks like an unattractive detriment on the local area. At the moment, speaking personally, I wouldn't want to live next to it. I think it pulls down the area, it's a conservation area, and it's appropriate, in my view, that we focus on this application, the policy context, and ultimately where we need this to get to. Now, in relation to my question earlier to the officer, what is the substantive difference between the implementation of the enforcement notice and this application? It is whether what's built on the site is the previous building, as was, or effectively a new building which would be consistent with the planning application for the previous building that this committee previously approved. On that basis, and recognising the policies that the officers run through in the report, I can see very limited ways that as a committee we would refuse this application. And I haven't heard put to me in any of the from any of the speakers the mechanism of how we would refuse this application. Nor have I read that in any of the representations. I appreciate the point that has been made that we should defer this application, but I don't see that deferring this application speeds the resolution of the site in terms of getting something happening there. Now, if other members have a different view, that would be a helpful focus of the debate, because I think we should focus on this application that we have before us, and getting to a sensible outcome for the site where it becomes once again an important contributor to the conservation area.
Councillor Fox. Thank you.
I think we're all frustrated at the way events have turned on this, but I think at the end of the day we have to come up with a decision which we have to judge it as to whether it's going to harm or enhance the conservation area and all the other facts that the officer has put in the report. And I think the critical, in my view at least, the critical paragraph is the last one on page 39 before you get to section 4, which is headed amenity. And the report, after quite careful consideration, is saying there's a mixture of neutral and enhancement to the designated and non-designated heritage assets, and will retain the character and quality of the existing garden, providing an open aspect within the conservation area. I've heard nothing in any of the debate so far that goes against that, and I feel that it does therefore accord with the relevant policy in the local plan and with the MPPF. And earlier in the report, Verity does go through the MPPF with some interesting and helpful comments, and that basically what we're not doing in an MPPF, what the MPPF is telling us not to do, is cover the area in aspect and basically not do anything. But we have to look at sensitive development. I think deferral just kicks the can down the road. And I think the important thing is to get, which is what most of the speakers were saying, and I respect that, is to actually get a decision quickly to enable the building to be redeveloped as quickly as possible. And if not, then you've got the fallback situation of the enforcement situation. So one way or the other, it's going to happen. But this planning application, I think, does yield a situation which does either neutral or enhance. So until I hear anything different, I'll be in favour of the application.
Councillor George Darling.
Thank you, Chair. I think I disagree slightly with Councillor Fox on this, as in I appreciate a lot of the assessment here is saying it's neutral or enhancing, but a lot of the enhancing points were already approved or already have been undertaken by works that have happened or the previous approved planning. Our key focus here, in my view, should be on that key point of the demolition and rebuild of the original parts of the dwelling and the associated boundary wall. And I appreciate they've been found to be structurally unstable, but reading the report, it seems that this is a retrospective application, and if it had been done at that point, that hadn't been assessed, that hadn't been in place, and it's being assessed as neutral based on the fact that it's been found to be unstable. But actually, I'm not sure we would have approved this if it had come through with the original application for that demolition and rebuild of the original parts. I think there's an element of chicken and egg, and we don't know whether it was unstable to begin with, or did the demolition works make it unstable. And I guess that's slightly beyond what we're deciding here. But I feel a bit uncomfortable with approving this, because actually we're not comparing it to how the site is now or how unstable that wall is now, or it's gone, but we should be looking at how it was when this originally was approved, in my eyes.
Councillor Billings.
I think, Chair, all of us are uncomfortable with how we've got here in terms of the process that started from an application that's very similar to the one we have before us in terms of the elevation treatment, and between this committee previously considering a very similar elevation treatment to now, we've gone through a process where it's upset a lot of the members of the community. The optics seem unusual and seem to be detracting in some respects, in my view, from the key question we have. If we go back to the previous original as-was cottage, there were flat-roofed elements on there. So I ask myself, in my mind, is that really is that actually, are those flat-roofed elements really contributing so strongly to the conservation area? What we have before us is a pitched roof building. But even again, that's not the key question. The key question is, in policy terms, this application that we have against the policy matrix that we have, and to me, I'd agree with Councillor Fox, kicking the can down the road would be a deferral. And if we end up with a situation where the council's then enforcing the enforcement notice, what we've said is that the developer's got to build the cottage as was, including the flat-roofed elements. Now, I'm not sure that that is the most desirable outcome from the general amenity of the conservation area, when what we have before us is, in my personal view, a more attractive building which has pitched roofs, which this committee previously resolved to allow. So not only do I struggle with how I would refuse this if I was refusing it, I don't think deferring it is a constructive way to get an outcome in terms of making the site visually appealing. And if we were to rely on the enforcement notice, what we'd end up creating is a dwelling with flat roofs, when I think what we have in this proposal is a pitched roof. Now, it's very unhelpful in terms of the process of how we've got here, but personally, I'm more minded to approval than anything else, unless I hear anything further in debate. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Penny.
Thank you, Chair. Two things have come out from this debate for me. On deferral, it's kind of why I asked the question that I did earlier, because like that does have a certain temptation around it. But we heard from the officer earlier that regardless of the outcome of that appeal, and we have to take her in earnest, that wouldn't impact upon her officer report and indeed her recommendation. And so therefore, as much as I have that initial sympathy with that idea, I can't see how that would change things, and we'd find ourselves here again in a few months, because those are effectively parallel processes that goes as slightly absurd as that may seem, and frustrating as that is. The second point, coming to Councillor George Darling to put you on the spot, thank you Ozzy for chucking that into the debate, but in terms of kind of taking up a point Councillor Bidding's made, if you were minded to refuse this, I appreciate you're not a usual planning committee member, but obviously when we refuse something, and not to teach you to suck eggs, we have to give reasons why we would refuse something in planning policy terms. And for you, what do you think that those refusal reasons would be?
Thanks, Nick. I think I'm finding it really difficult to refuse this, and I also I agree with you, Adam, that deferral isn't really an option here, but something doesn't sit right with me about this at all, and it doesn't sit right with all of us, and that's where I'm really struggling with this. And
we'll agree with you on that.
Yeah, and I think that's where as a committee we're going to struggle, but I feel like we're going in a direction which, yeah.
Sorry, Chair, if I could just step in and just say about a deferral could potentially lead to an appeal for non-determination and potential costs for unreasonable conduct.
If there's no further debate, I'm going to be looking for a proposer. Councillor Billings.
So, Chair, accepting that, as I've said before, I'm as frustrated as any other member of this committee as to how we've got here. It is deeply frustrating because I think the process could have been made much more easily, and I think possibly there's an acceptance that everyone around this probably recognises that. Recognising this committee's got a job to do, recognising we've got a very clear officer report, there's no reasons that have come forward in debate as to why we should support a deferral or what we would use as a reason for refusal. My proposal would be approval in accordance with the officer report and the conditions therein. The officer report very clearly sets out and I think it's important to contextualise what I've said in relation to that. In relation to pages, I think it's 26 and 27, how at the same time as this application going through proper process, there's also a separate enforcement process, which is clearly the mechanism to ensure that the application that we may approve following that proposal gets built, so that the site is once again restored to making a valuable contribution to the conservation area. And I think it's that context, which is why I'm putting this forward. So there's that parallel enforcement process to this planning process. So on that basis, my proposal would be approval in accordance with the recommendation in the officer report and the conditions therein. Thank you.
Councillor Fox to second. So I'll call on the vote now, colleagues. All those in favour?
3, 4, 5, 6, Chair.
All those against?
None, Chair.
All those abstain?
2, Chair.
Thank you, everybody. So the item's approved. Colleagues, we're going to take 5 minutes just to get ready for the next item. Thank you.
Just
the right hand button.
Okay, colleagues, I'm going to call back the meeting to order now. Thank you. We're going to move on now to item 6. This is consider an application for land north of Totnes Road in Colleton St Mary, and it's planning number P/2024/0368. The clerk has confirmed those who have registered to speak upon entry to the meeting. I will therefore ask Scott Jones to introduce the application.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a reserved matters application relating to outline planning permission P/2019-0281, which was for up to 100 dwellings. And this application seeks approval for the layout, scale, appearance and landscaping details. Access was approved in detail at outline stage with a single access point off the Totnes Road located between numbers 352 and 338 Totnes Road here, and is not part of the matters for consideration today. So the site in question is here outlined in red, which is largely set behind properties off the Totnes Road, and we have the church and vicarage to the west, and Borough Park Road to the east as the chief sort of reference points. So this is a Google aerial view showing the site in its context. See, it's part of a wider field system at the edge of Paynton, and the high point of the site is here on the northern part outlined. Obviously, in terms of some context, Colleton St Mary is part of a wider future growth area, and there is some obviously further housing sites coming forward. See, this field here is currently being developed for up to 77 dwellings, and there are further phases on the south side of Totnes Road here that are within the future growth area with expected for housing. So this is another aerial context view for you. Just shows the site a bit closer in its context and the sort of complex topography of the site. Obviously it rises from the south by Totnes Road, northwards up to the hillside, or Obviously there are some undulations as you cross the site as well, where it dips in the middle and rises again. Obviously here again you see the residential properties of Totnes Road, the brownfield element of the site here where some barns, and we've got the end here of Borough Park Road, which is currently a dead end, and the church and vicarage there on the eastern extent. So just running through a couple of historic photos. This is looking eastwards from around the area of those barns that were on the previous slide. So we're looking basically, these are the Totnes Road properties here. We've got Ocean BMW, which is the sort of silvery roof there for some context, and the site extends beyond these trees to the far sort of tree line there you can see going up, which is behind which is the vicarage and the church. So this is spinning around 180 degrees and now looking east. We've got some rooftops there from the end properties at the Borough Park Road. So just a couple of slides for some planning history and context now. So this is an indicative plan that was submitted at outline stage that established some concepts, principally being sort of development on the lower slopes, roughly in line with the rear boundaries of Borough Park Road, public open space on the upper slopes, drainage infrastructure towards the southern extent of the development, some play space on the western edge, along with some allotments and orchards, and pedestrian connectivity east-west as well. And this is obviously not for consideration today, but just for some detail, this is the approved access into the site, which is roughly in the location of the existing zebra crossing, which is the grey section here, which is to be removed and replaced with a light-controlled crossing just there on the inward bound side. And this is the area where that junction will be created as part of the detail already approved. Final slide on the context. So this is a previously approved Reserve Matters Outline application, which was approved in May 2023 by the following presentation at the committee. So this scheme was reported to members with some degree of concern around the sort of the suburban nature of the layout, with the extent of sort of highways. However, obviously, the officer recommendation was one that, subject to seeking some improvements to the materials, the concerns did not outweigh the public benefits of the scheme, and it was recommended for approval ultimately, and members did agree with that decision. And this is a consented scheme, is say that it's commenced, I believe. And just moving on now to the proposal before us. So this is the now proposed Reserve Matters layout. So here we have, similar to the indicative outline proposals previously in the reserve and the previous Reserve Matters, we've got development on the lower slopes with public open space on the upper slopes. Again, this developed area loosely runs in line with Borough Park Road. The approved main access down here is supported by a wide landscaped opening, which is a concept that was supported by the design review panel that this scheme previously went to prior to the application. And the road network here is sort of more informal than that previously approved in the historic Reserve Matters. Presents a less dominant and softer sort of framework for development moving forward. Again, we've got positive permeability for pedestrians and cyclists. We've got an access on the eastern side running through, and there's a proposed for the development to go to the edge of the site to the west at Borough Park Road for a east-west pedestrian and cycle route. There's also permeability north-south. Obviously, away from the road network, we've got some stepped access through here. We've got the central spine, which winds its way up from the entrance up through to the play area, to the development, and we've got some, say, pedestrian access points linking through, some intermittent points as well. Touching on the central green spine, obviously it's chiefly it's mixed use. It's a recreational route through. It's landscaped and provides a route to the play space and obviously the public space beyond. There's also some drainage infrastructure through this green spine as well. So dual purpose in that regard. In terms of the basic framework, it's substantially one of detached houses, with 70 of the 100 dwellings being detached or linked detached, and the remainder are a mixture of semi-detached, short terraces, or combined buildings with dwellings and apartments sat beside each other. There are 8 apartments within the scheme. 4 of those are in the southwest corner here, near to the vicarage. And the other 4 apartments are in the eastern corner, close to Borough Park Road here. So in terms of affordable housing, the scheme provides 30 affordable housing within the 100 units. The mix being established through the outline consent with 10 social rent, 10 affordable rent and 10 shared ownership. So we've got principal areas within the southwestern corner here, served off 2 different roads because of the rising levels. The blue dots are the affordable rents, so we've got some affordable rents on both sides of the site. The orange dots are shared ownership. So again, we've got some shared ownership down here within this little phase, got some shared ownership in the phase above, and some shared ownership in the green phase up there. And the purple dots are social rent, which are down in this section, and again within this mixed dwelling and apartment block here. So this is the most recent proposed road adoption plan. So this obviously takes into account the road network, the main footpath links through, the light blue here are also proposed to be adopted, and also takes in obviously the connections to the edge of the site to the west and to the east here to Borough Park Road. So this is a brief framework for the proposed pedestrian and cycle routes within the scheme. Obviously we've got the main sort of east-west run here. So you'd go along from the Blagdon Road entrance, and you can either use the stepped access through here or go around on the road network. Also you've got the north and south routes centrally, also on the western part of the site and also the eastern part of the site there, which provides a positive framework really for movement through the scheme. In terms of the public open space, there's obviously proposals to have mown footpaths through this space and also a sort of perimeter walkway, recreational walkway through the sunken lane adjacent to the established hedgerows. So this is a proposed drainage plan, which is supported by the council's drainage engineer, and there's no objections either from South West Water or the Environment Agency. So in terms of surface water drainage, it's controlled. It's principally a controlled system with a controlled discharge via connection to the local public sewer, which in course feeds at a controlled rate to the local watercourse. The system includes a series of attenuation tanks and swales through the system that act as a sort of partial feature of the drainage system, but also obviously part of the green infrastructure and landscaping. The FAL system is proposed to be adopted or put to adoption through a Section 104 process, and again, obviously follows the general pattern of the road network in terms of the positioning of the system through the scheme. Moving on to design and appearance, the proposal presents a character area concept with 3 pockets seeking to respond to the immediate context within the scheme. Firstly, here on the eastern edge of the site, it's a sort of small pocket that's seeking to deliver sort of a square entranceway from Borough Park Road, which has a form of gateway character, which was a concept supported by the design panel. Character area 2, through the green spine, we've got properties here that are addressing the landscaped area and treated in materials that seek to reflect the landscaped character here, with stone and brick and boarding in natural colours generally proposed. Character area 3 down here in the southwestern corner of the site, they're seeking to respond to the listed church and vicarage adjacent here. So again, we got materials, a choice of red stone, red brick, and natural slate roofs, in a sort of a simple a dwelling form, but providing a simple palette that reflects the buildings adjacent. So just running through some of the house types for you, so to have an understanding of the visual appearance of the scheme. So these first few slides are the proposed elevations within that character area 3, down by the towards Blagdon Road and the church and the vicarage. So here we got obviously quite a simple building form, red brick and slate roofings. So we're getting again another, say, dwelling type similarly. And this is the sort of the short terrace that contained both flats and houses, which is referenced in the plan as apartment block A, but you say really it's a sort of a short terrace in general character. You say 2 different building materials there, you've got the brick and the stone, you say in the slate roof. So the central core of this will be apartments, with all served with their own front doors. So you've got 4 apartments in the central bit with a dwelling either side there. So moving on to the area on the eastern extent, which is close to Borough Park Road. That's where sort of render is the base material on the concrete tiles. Again, simple sort of dwelling form, 2-storey pitched roofs. And this is the apartment block, which is on the southern side of that sort of entrance square section that was shown on the layout. So this is the front of it here, so we've got some access to the apartments. And then the rear wing, which is this section here, looking at from the side. You've got 2 semi-detached properties, or linked detached. So moving across the sort of the remainder of the site with a few slides, we've got some house types that have different treatments depending on where they are within the site. So for example, this house type here, the lower end of the site, closer to the vicarage, and along that general southern run, we've got say red brick and red stone and just slate roofing. And then this picture on the right is of the same property with different treatment further up the site. And again, we've got similar properties like that. See, these are the ones with the traditional gabled roofs. and again moving through. So this is property on the left. This will be sort of that view, low down the site on the main road through from the main access. But dwelling on the right will be a bit higher up in the site as it transitions to a different sort of character. Similar treatment for this. And again, this is just giving you a understanding of the dwelling forms here. As you'll see, quite a few of these properties are treated in a split level form, which is the concept to try and sort of manage the rise in levels as you go northwards up through the site. A couple more dwelling types. And this is obviously I think the northernmost dwelling type, I think, which you'll have looking northwards up towards the hillside, and the sort of the 2.5-3 story element will be contained away from the public view, looking southwards there. So just looking to sort of explain how, again, obviously that this is how the scheme is treated. This is a materials plan. Most evident colour here is the infill colour, which is the roof materials. So we've got the orange being natural slate, which is, you say, down in this pocket, but also extends along the southern run and also the central pod here. Concrete tiles on the eastern extent, and then the remainder will be sort of a standing seam detail single ply membrane roofs there for the remainder, which is about approximately half of the number of units. Oh, sorry, I'll just pop you back. Just looking at some of the border treatments here, you've got the green lines, which are Devon banks with hedge tops, so they frame most of the key public areas of the site. So you've got the transition from the development area to the public open space in the north, but you've also got these sections that sort of run around and frame some of the sort of more prominent public areas, and also the southern boundary as well that terminates the development site as you get to the properties on the Totnes Road. In terms of walls, the sort of prominent public facing walls will be a mixture of brick and render in terms of secure and a robust material for those. Fencing is generally contained to the private borders within the scheme, away from the most evident public views. In between some of the key streets, we've got areas of planting which sit outside of the public, outside of the private areas of plots, so they'll be part of the private management plan in terms of the public open space, but obviously non-accessible, which provides some sort of longevity to these sections here. So just trying to illustrate the scheme for you, this is a couple of slides of street scenes. So this is just highlighted them with yellow here. So this is the southernmost street. So if you take the church, which is off-site, and then the first building on the western side would be that mixed apartment and dwellings here, short terrace, and then you run along that southern street with these stone and brick buildings. So again, this is highlighted here on the section plan. So this is from the main access running up through the site. So you've got these dwellings as you come up through the site, starting with brick and stone, and then you say starting to transition to that render, which is as you get towards the upper half of the development. And finally, a couple of street scenes, say highlighted yellow again, and now we've moved into the sort of the rendered area, which is broken up with boarding panels, which are proposed to be in sort of two different types, either natural or more coastal colouring. So we've got a public open space plan quickly for you to obviously see the extent that is outside of the private ownership of. So you've got the road system and then the dwelling plots in white. Then blue is the remainder of the public open space. Some of these areas will be secure, so obviously not private, but private and then maintained by a proposed management company that will deal with the site. So that's what these sort of fingers of blue are across the scheme here and here. The play area, the main play area, which is the LEAP, local equipped area of play in green. A lap here, a smaller play area, which is on this pedestrian route that comes down through. And we've got the allotments in orange and the orchards over here, which are mixed in with the blue. So this is the proposed landscaping, which just provides a little bit more detail. Say moving through the site, just some key elements. You've got the landscape entrance, and then you've got the green spine up through the scheme with a planned to be an attractive walking environment up through, continuous, and then you've got the play area, and then obviously access through to that wider informal space there. And from that play area at the top of the site, this is an illustrative view, just to show you a little bit of a artist impression of the site. And proposed parking, obviously it's a mixture of garage parking on drive or small courtyard around the apartment blocks. There is some parking for the allotments as well. And there is these purple sections are just some planned sort of general use visitor spaces within the road network. And this is the section through the scheme. So the top section is the central spine, and the bottom three sections around the sort of the southwest corner. So these three lines here, I think they are just showing that. So you've got the boundary treatment, the hedge top Devon bank, and then you've got the landscape buffer, and then you've got that cycle pedestrian route, the road, and obviously properties. Bit more of an illustrative site section for you. See how the development sort of sits in the site. And then some phasing just for understanding how this is likely to come forward. So the first phase is the green phase, which obviously provides the access and the immediate properties. It's been extended to include these properties, which then means that this link can come forward as part of the first phase and get that sort of benefit of getting, say, pedestrian movements off the Totnes road, which isn't the best of walking environments, considering the parking pressures and the narrowness of the footways there. Phase 2 is the blue section, which includes generally all of the public open space and the remainder of the properties on this side, the allotments, etc. That obviously means that the public open space will be delivered quite early in the scheme, which is welcomed. And then we've got phase 3, which is the pink, and phase 4 finally, which is the orange there. So obviously the key issues have been outlined within the committee report. Obviously they're just touching on some headlines really for you, because obviously it's been relevant. The principle of development, see, that's been established through the outline consent, and obviously it is an allocated site, obviously through the future growth area as well. In terms of housing supply, provision of 100 housing, 70 of those which are market and 30 affordable units. It's obviously a very significant public benefit, considering the housing supply shortage that Torbay is struggling with. In terms of design and visual impact, obviously touched on the layout of the scheme, presenting a more positive, informal layout than previously presented, sort of a more positive response to the sort of semi-rural, rural context, and one which provides good permeability through it. In terms of the scale, obviously the scale is between sort of 1 and 2 story split units, up to 2 to 3 story, which is considered acceptable. in the context. And obviously there is a need to manage that rise in levels. And obviously doing that within the buildings and going up to partial 3 stories means less reliance on large sort of retaining structures at the backs of gardens, etc., which presents a better sort of amenity environment for occupiers. In terms of appearance, obviously this raised some sort of key points through the presentation in terms of responding positively to the church and the vicarage in terms of those listed buildings nearby, and also the sort of the landscaped entrance with stone walling that will respond positively to the listed barns on the junction of Stoke Road near to that access. So there's some very good positive immediate contextual proposals in those 2 elements. Obviously the appearance provides some good variety and some sort of well thought out concepts through the scheme, and is considered obviously acceptable as concluded in the report. And in terms of landscaping, again, I think this is a step forward on what members have previously considered on this site. We've also got that green spine that runs through. There was a degree of spine on the previous scheme, but it wasn't continuous and it didn't have the recreational value of this one. This is more substantial, has dual use, and creates a very sort of central focus within the scheme, which is very positive. All the elements at the northern end of the site in terms of the wider public open space, allotments, orchards, play area, etc. And obviously the green treatment to the Devon banking through the scheme presents a very positive landscape framework and is supported, and part of that obviously links to the ecology sensitivities in the site and needing those sort of dark corridors around the edge. Heritage impacts, talked about the positive framing in response to the adjacent listed buildings. In terms of residential amenity, within the scheme, obviously there's been some sort of movement in terms of the housing design and the roof terraces proposed. We've sort of massaged the size and location of some of them to ensure that there's sort of no undue overlooking of adjacent properties. Certainly where there's an uneven relationship between different housing types that don't have similar roof terraces or houses on lower plots. So terraces have been sort of drawn back to filter views sidewards and ensure that obviously views to the rear are filtered by the end of the building themselves. In terms of obviously housing internal environments, all very positive. Garden space is generous, and they say outdoor space for all dwellings and apartments. And they obviously have good levels of natural lighting and outlooks as well. There's obviously some very pleasant views through the development that will be presented. In terms of the amenity considerations of adjacent occupiers, obviously there are properties along Totnes Road. The development presents quite a sort of positive arrangement in terms of presenting sort of a landscape buffer and then a road, which then presents quite sort of generous distances between buildings along the southern border. So in terms of interlooking and overlooking, you say the distances are generally around 30 odd metres from memory. There's obviously intermittent tree planting along that southern boundary as well, which will filter some views and obviously it's just soften the views of the development as well for the existing occupiers. In terms of highways, movement and parking, obviously the committee report does present a sort of an open position in terms of the Highway Authority having a number of concerns. Since the report was written, there's been a sort of further movement and a response from Highways, and that list of 20 or 30 points is now down to a handful of issues, which are all quite minor in content, which is reflected in the officer recommendation to members. Principally, you say obviously just as the headlines, Highways just looking to for all footpaths that are going to be adopted to be in black tarmac. They generally are. There's some elements that are through the green spine that are proposed to be within the adoptable areas that we'd like obviously within to have a similar material to what's proposed, which is a buff brick. That I think just needs some more discussion with highways colleagues to get the best sort of quality finish we can on that one. In terms of there's some concerns around the waste collection distances for a handful of properties. I think there is a solution there, and it is just a matter of either where the adopted roads, the extent of the adopted roads go to, or where the day-to-day bin storage areas are, being mindful obviously building regulations, and also Swissco's ambitions of where they would be happy collecting from, which I assume it would be from the edge of the adopted highway. So it just needs, I think, a little bit more conversations, but I think there is a positive solution there. There's a comment about visibility displays, but that has been addressed around 2 of the plots where the area they're concerned with is now within the proposed adoption areas. Minor point about the extent of the raised table between plots 32 and 47. It literally needs to be aligned a few metres down, so the ramp is not in line with the crossing point, but the raised table itself. So again, a very minor point that just needs a tweak to the plans. There's still a point about the exact crossing location near to the units 1 and 2, near the entrance, where there's the pedestrian route crosses the road. Obviously, that it does need a crossing point of some, but there's some tension around where that goes. It's been moved and removed. So I think there's a continued conversation there for the safest possible location on that. And that's all it is now. They say it's the list that's been mentioned is down to, say, just a small number of minor matters, which is say reflected in the officer recommendation. Ecology, everything is considered acceptable by the county ecologist, who has reviewed all the supplementary information. Obviously, there's some framework for protection of ecology through the outline, and that's come through this reserve matters scheme in terms of provision and location of a back barn, dark corridors, etc. Biodiversity net gain. In terms of flood risk, see there's a scheme that's supported by the council's drainage engineers in terms of that controlled discharge to the public sewer, then the local water course, and the design of it obviously to account for climate change and urban creep in terms of people adding small extensions, etc. through the scheme, through its life. In terms of low carbon development, I think we're largely there. There's just some ambiguity in the energy statement that's submitted. So there's a proposed condition just to ensure we get that extra teeth that obviously the neighbour plan policy seeks in terms of on-site renewable energy. And finally, yes, affordable housing, as stated, we have 30 units in a mix that are aligned with what's expected through the outline and what is considered to be a better offer than what was previously secured through the previous reserve matters, and obviously supported by the council's affordable housing manager. So hence we have the officer recommendation, which is one of approval, subject to the satisfactory resolution of outstanding highway points to be delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing, Transport and Climate Emergency. The conditions as outlined, with final drafting of conditions delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing, Transport and Climate Emergency, and the resolution of any new material considerations that may come to light following Planning Committee to be delegated to the Divisional Director of Planning, Housing, Transport and Climate Emergency, including the addition of any necessary further planning conditions or obligations. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. We have no one registered to speak against the application committee. I therefore call Mr. Andrew Rowe to address the meeting in support of the application. Mr. Rowe, you have 5 minutes, and the clerk will let you know when you have 1 minute remaining.
Thank you, Chair. Can I firstly say thank you, Mr. Jones, for a really comprehensive talk through the whole scheme. So I'll keep my comments relatively brief. Thank you, Chair, members. Good evening. I'm speaking in support of the Reserve Matters application for 100 new homes at Colleton St Mary, which represents the next step in delivering a well-planned, high-quality development on a site that's long been allocated for housing in the local plan, in the neighbourhood plan, and in the Colleton St Mary master plan. As we heard, outline permission for this site has already been granted, establishing the principle of development together with the site access, which has been approved in detail and isn't for consideration today. Reserve Matters application has also already been approved and could be built out. The application before you today seeks approval of Reserve Matters, namely, as we heard, the layout, the scale, the appearance and landscaping. Since the outline permission and the approval of the previous Reserve Matters application, the design team has undertaken a comprehensive replan to seek to further improve the overall quality and character of the scheme. The layout now delivers a more attractive, better connected community that fully accords with adopted planning policy. The proposal is policy compliant and the Section 106 agreement is already in place, securing a range of community benefits. Those include affordable housing at 30%, that's 30 new affordable homes. Children's play areas are actually, there's 2 as part of this scheme, and they are deficient in this area generally, so it's a big plus for the local area. In addition to that, significant amount of public open space, which will be open for all, and allotments. There will be a new community orchard, and there was it was very key to get strong cycle and pedestrian connections through the site to take traffic, particularly children, off that Totnes road, connecting to the local primary school, and indeed with the wider area. The access to the site also connects into the existing wider paint and cycle network. The scheme has also been designed to carefully to respect and enhance ecology in the area and result in no net loss of biodiversity. Throughout this process, the applicant has positively engaged with local residents. As Mr Jones said, this scheme has been positively engaged with the design review panel, something that I know Torbay are championing, and that was done at quite an early stage, so it was a meaningful process and has fed into what you see this evening. And of course, the council's officers in terms of the full range who now support this scheme. So the scheme before you this evening reflects that collaborative approach and results in an officer recommendation of approval. So in summary, members, this is a well-designed, policy-compliant development that works far better with the natural topography and introduces much stronger landscape features and represents a real improvement in terms of public realm when viewed against the currently approved scheme. It will deliver high-quality homes and meaningful community benefits on an allocated site with an existing planning permission. I therefore respectfully request that you support your officer's recommendation and approve this Reserve Matters scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Rowe. So, thank you. So, committee members, I now invite questions to Scott Jones. Please, may I remind members questions should only cover matters not raised in the presentation. So, colleagues, Councillor Fox.
Thank you for both the presentations, very helpful. Just a small question on the highways, the link through to Borough Park Road, is that just an emergency access link, or is that a link that can be used 24/7?
So that's proposed as a sustainable travel link, principally, with so for pedestrians and cyclists with emergency access as well. So, but you say certainly not. There's no ambitions or expectations. It's a general travel link for vehicles, solely emergency. Thank you.
Councillor Tolchard.
Thank you, Chair. Talking about the community benefits, I mean, clearly there's a very large open space, as it were, which I think is going to be open to or for public access. The orchard and the allotments and the sort of play areas and that sort of thing, is that going to be open to non-residents, as it were, for community benefit?
So I'm not sure on the general expectations for, you say, the distribution or the offer for the allotments. I imagine, you say, this is just obviously my personal view. Imagine it may be something that's opened up to the residents of the development, and if not more widely, that could be how it works. But there's no detail in terms of how it would be run, and similarly for the orchards, really. I imagine that would potentially be informal, open, public use.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Billings.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of questions, please, Mr. Jones. The first one, at what stage of delivery of the development is it anticipated to adopt the roads, please? And I ask because I've had a few issues with new developments in my ward where dwellings have been occupied for some years and the road outside is still not adopted. What stage is it proposed in this, please?
So obviously the submission presents an adoption plan. So obviously the applicant is presenting a position that they are going to offer the roads up for adoption. In terms of how that is secured, I'll just have to check some of the
My sympathies looking at the documents. I was trying to find this myself earlier and I got a bit lost.
hopefully there's something relevant here. Right, so I'll read this, so I'll see if it's relevant as I read it, if that's okay. So condition 7 of the outline consent requires that no dwelling shall be occupied until all estate roads required for access to that dwelling have been constructed to adopt all standards in accordance with the Torbay Highway Guide for new developments in force at the time, or an agreement has been entered into between the developer and the council as highway authority under section 38 of the Highways Act for the adoption of the estate road. So that's principally as adoption is offered and cannot be forced. That principally outlines that to occupy any of the dwellings, the roads to that dwellings either need to be under a signed agreement that's obviously for the two parties to agree when they adopt it, possibly when the heavy works are finished, or it's been built to adoptable standards, so it provides an acceptable road system for future occupiers.
That's really helpful. So from my understanding, if there was as in the case of the development in my ward, if there was a difference of opinion between the developer and the Highways Authority as to whether the road was constructed to the correct standard, and therefore the road wasn't adopted, it wouldn't be lawful, it wouldn't be in accordance with the decision notice for those dwellings to be occupied. In other words, that will have had to have got resolved. The developer can't turn around and say, I've built it to the right standard, it's just the Highways Authority is not adopting it, as is the case in my ward. Would that be sufficient to deal with that, please?
So if there's a difference of opinion on whether it's been built to adoptable standards, then yes, that condition should hold some teeth in terms of if the Highway Authority are confident that it's not built to adoptable standards, then obviously it wouldn't be in accordance with that condition.
That's really helpful. Thank you. That's the first question I've got. The children's play area, is that proposed that that's maintained in perpetuity as part of the management agreement by the management company, or does that become the responsibility of the local authority, please?
So obviously adoption by the local authority is an option. I'm not sure about the appetite on that, but there is a, it is obviously part of the identified public open space, and the general framework for management of that is identified or secured through the legal agreement on the outline permission for an open space management plan. So say that mechanism secures the legalities of who's going to look after this expanse of public open space, and that, so that we have obviously the details on that submitted to us as well.
Okay, so speaking as the cabinet member responsible for that area, I think there'd be a very limited appetite by the local authority to take on the long-term maintenance obligations of children's play areas. As currently drafted, that's a matter that the developer is proposing, is dealt with, and is maintained by the developer. Great, thank you. My next question, in relation to materials, you've got a materials condition. Sorry, the conditions weren't numbered, but you've got a materials condition on page 91. We don't explicitly refer to roofs. Is it intended that that will refer to the roofs, and would it be worthwhile including the word roof, do we think, maybe?
I would suggest it does include roofs, but I'm not adverse to providing some greater clarity on that by inserting some words of choice.
I thought it did include roofs, but I just would welcome suggestions to officers to expand the list of words in there to make it absolutely clear. And I'm particularly thinking about the standing seam element of the roofs, and also the slates we've got. And then, sorry about the continued nature of these questions, Chair. On the drainage element, can I be assisted, please, by the team in relation to where the foul drainage will be adopted post-completion? In other words, which is it shown on the approved plans where South West Water will be responsible to broadly, or is it South West Water will be responsible for all of the drainage underneath the adopted highways, for example?
Yes, so the submitted flood risk assessment touches on the foul water. Obviously, the greater detail is the surface water drainage, but so the expectation is that all of the foul water drainage will be offered up for adoption by the statutory undertaker through a Section 104 process. So, so where the proposals show a link, obviously, and a new foul system through the scheme, it's proposed that obviously the system in general will be put to adoption with South West Water. So it doesn't just plug into their system, it's put off to adoption through a Section 104 agreement.
And so throughout this development, South West Water have indicated that they're quite happy to adopt that through a 104 agreement process. And so ultimately, once all built, it will be either the private property owner's responsibility within the curtilage of their property, or South West Water's as currently proposed. It won't be another party's, and therefore unclear. We don't need to have a management company looking after it in the same way we do with the surface water. Is that correct?
Yes, so South West Water haven't, they're obviously aware of the proposals in terms of the scheme's foul, because they mentioned requiring some ongoing assessment of the capacity locally, and they've confirmed that there is sufficient capacity. So that they're obviously aware of the proposal to offer this up for adoption and connect to their system, and they haven't really got any comments of note on the foul water proposals. So there's, say, along with the surface water, there's inferred support on that.
And then does that, in the same way we had with highways, where we tied the adoption to the occupation, have we got the same with that on the foul water element?
From memory, I don't think the legal agreement covers foul waters like it does surface water treatment. So it sort of...
Sorry, Chair. No, the Section 106 agreement only covers the surface water. The statutory authority for dealing with foul would be South West Water. And as part of the Section 104, I think it's the Water Industry Act or something, can't remember, it's outside of my knowledge, but yeah, that's what would be, you know, the framework for the developer delivering an adoptable network of sewer pipes and what have you that the South West Water would be happy to adopt. It's not triggered necessarily by any the similar triggers that you'd have in a planning agreement, I don't believe. So I'm not sure how that would work in terms of timings, but I can't imagine that we'd want people living somewhere without that all being in place. So it would be generally, I believe, during the sort of construction well, they'd get an agreement prior to construction, I imagine, but they'd obviously oversee it during that process. So I can't imagine they'd have people, well, I hope not, moving in and not having that already dealt with by an agreement that they could enforce against the developer. But it's a different regime to the planning one.
Okay, so I can be assured in planning terms, could I have would it be appropriate, if I was so minded, to have a condition in here that said, prior to first occupation of the residential property, the foul drainage will be constructed in accordance with the approved plans to an adoptable standard for the statutory undertaker, for example, which then made it really clear if there was a problem with the drainage, you can't start occupying the houses?
To my mind, Chair, I would say that probably more likely to be suitable for an informative or something to say that the developer will have to ensure that an agreement under the Water Industry Act, Section 104, is in place or something, rather than, I don't know if it would meet the test for a planning condition.
This week, actually, we heard from the government around compliance with conditions, and just to sort of read that out a second, that the imposition of planning conditions related to other legislation, such as environment, health, building control and water, I think we wouldn't be able to. We do an informative though, and obviously we can track it back to Section 106 and then Section 104. But yeah, we can't really use planning conditions to relate to other legislation. The government were quite clear on that, actually, last week.
Okay, I'll come back to that maybe in a minute. And then the final one, the surface water. I'm very clear from the documents that were part of the previous planning application that all the surface water is being maintained by the management company in perpetuity, which is a defined period for 125 years. That's correct, officers, is it?
Yes, Chair, that is correct. And also to provide some comfort, the highways agreement has already been signed back in April of this year for the roads to be built out and eventually, if they're up to adoptable standard, then adopted by the Highway Authority. And generally speaking, what would happen is they'd build it up to a certain standard and then have to maintain it for a period of a couple of years, and then subject to the Highway Authority being satisfied that it meets the highway safety requirements. They go through various stages of inspections and what have you, and once that level of standard has been reached, then it would be for the Highway Authority to adopt it.
Thank you. And sorry, final question, Chair. I was just going, do apologise, team, for so many questions. Going back to the earlier point about the foul drainage, if there was a concern that the foul drainage wasn't being constructed properly, for example, and we said it was covered by other legislation, how would that work in practice? What element of the council would pick up with that and deal with that, so I can be assured that there won't be a problem in my mind, please?
To my mind, that would be for the the statutory undertaker, they would be under an obligation, to my mind, that it would be for them to pick that up with the developer. I don't think that the local authority has any powers to enforce the terms of a Section 104 agreement. It would be for the South West Water, to my mind. They would have the powers if it wasn't dealt with adequately, or wasn't built to adoptable standard, or there were problems. Then a bond normally would cover. They would probably be able to enforce the obligations by perhaps use of a bond, and I think that's the reason why the 104 agreement is in place. So they could call on the bond if there was a default by the developer. So it gives that extra security and safeguards the future occupiers against any sort of failure of that system, that foul water drainage system.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the patience.
Colleagues, any other? Well, I've got one or two. Sorry? So members obviously know this is my ward. I have to say that the change in the indicative plans to what we have now is a dramatic improvement, and I have to acknowledge there has been a collaborative approach between residents, the DRP and officers, because I've been very much involved with that along the last 18 months, I suppose. So I was so glad to see a huge change in the softening of the impact for current residents, you know, along the west, the south and the east. And they've been actually significant. And I look at what's here now, and I estimate there's 50% plus of the area is actually proposed green space, which is superb. We know there are residents who just don't want it because obviously they wouldn't. You know, they've been looking at fields, and obviously they didn't want the planning application. But we're not here for that. We're here for the reserve matters, landscape appearance, etc. So I just wanted to say there's been a significant improvement. But my question to the officer is really the phasing of this work, first of all. So, you know, for the residents of the south boundary, the west boundary, the vicarage, etc. At what, and I want this openly said, at what stage will the banks be there? You know, the fencing that's been proposed just before the banks, the hedging, etc. So that's my first question.
Thank you. So if we just, oh, we're not going that way. Let's go forward. Sorry, I've presented too many slides.
That's all right.
Takes up a bit of time. Right then, so here we are. Sorry. Phasing plan. There we are. So, obviously, as I think I touched on during the presentation, we've got phase 1 in green, which delivers the pedestrian link to the Bagdell Road end, which is obviously very positive. And obviously, there's the degree of landscaping within that phase. And then the majority of the public space is in the blue, which is phase 2, which brings it forward, say, in the early part of the scheme, which is again positive. In terms of triggers to ensure that's done, I believe there is possibly a condition about the timing of landscaping within phases to be done within the first available planting season. So I am happy to ensure that there's a firm footing to ensure that everything is complete, and obviously also workable at the same time, not to undue stress on how a development will come forward. But this phasing plan presents a good broad approach in terms of ensuring that we do get the public open space early. And I think that there are conditions, I think, on the outline about landscaping being done within first available planting season. So if you're happy, I am more than happy to make a note to ensure that that element is duly delivered on, and there's clarity, because you say it is obviously an important element to ensure that things do come forward at an appropriate time, do not get left or forgotten about. So happy to take instruction on that.
Thank you, Scott. Yeah, it's because as Councillor Billings mentioned, there are other developments obviously going on in the Bay, and some other developments the landscaping has been a bit later than actually when the houses have been built. So I just want to get it the right way round. The second question, I think we've covered it, but it's a huge space that's going to be covered by the management company. So I'm just want to get a bit of a reassurance on the solidity of the management company, but I think that was read out for where in perpetuity is 125 years.
Yes, obviously there's a lot of public open space and a lot of, land with ecological value. So obviously the landscape and ecological management plan will manage the space in terms of its ecological value and content moving forward. The mechanisms within the legal agreement in terms of the open space and management plan provides the framework for how it's going to be run, who's going to run it, and for the authority to know that detail. So it is in place, as in all sort of major householding schemes, in terms of SUDs and open space management being submitted to the local authority.
Thank you. Our job's just to be aware of what could be problems, and I've had experience in management companies, hasn't particularly worked well, but I'm glad to hear what you've just said, Scott. So that's excellent. On the issue along the southern boundary and the western boundary and the eastern boundary, page 76 mentions about a fencing at 1.2 metres, and I was mindful it to be a tad higher because it will take time for the Devon Bank, the hedging, etc., to get into place and to provide the security for the current residents. So I'm mindful if colleagues are in agreement, to maybe push that to 1.5, but that was just a comment. Is that feasible?
So the conversations have been progressing in terms of possible treatments along that southern boundary. Obviously, in the long term, the Devon Bank and the hedge on top will mature and provide that sort of permanent screen. In the short term, while it establishes, yes, I do think there's some sort of credible reasoning to provide something that's slightly higher. So there have been in some discussions about 1.5 post and mesh wire or stock-proof fencing, which obviously chest height type barrier, which I think is sort of an appropriate boundary to provide some form of greater security while that Devon Bank and hedge matures along that southern border. So yes, that's in discussion. I'm expecting an amendment to that effect.
Thank you. And finally, I couldn't see anything about the construction management plan. I assume that's all part of the original. And just wanted to get clarification. We're having problems with another site where vehicles are going off, taking all the mud's going on the road, the mud's going into the houses, etc., etc. Can you just clarify what's the situation going to be on this site for proper vehicle wheeling, cleanliness, etc.?
So there is a submitted construction management plan. It principally accords with the detail that's already been approved through the previous proposals for the site. It does need an update just to ensure that we have some greater detail on where the compounds are, because obviously the scheme has changed slightly. So the sort of the plans appended to it have changed, but there's some omission of detail to the previous. So the basic document is considered acceptable. It does touch on wheel washing for when and also the washing of the public roads as well within that document from memory. But you say it's the document's principally already been approved. It does require sort of a further plan update within it, within this application, and it will be then considered acceptable.
Thank you. Colleagues, any? Oh, lovely. Let's open it up to debate then. Councillor Tolshard.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly a great deal of work has been done between the developer and our officers on bringing this scheme to where it is now, which is, to my mind, very attractive. And the site brings so many advantages, doesn't it? I mean, contribution to housing numbers, including affordable social housing, and the access to the extensive public spaces, plus the pedestrian safety, which will take some, well, particularly the children and parents accessing the school along the main road will make that much better and safer. We've had so many extensive questions and such comprehensive answers. I'm not quite sure how much debate there will be. That having been said, I mean, I would be more than happy at this juncture to propose approval along the lines of the conditions in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Penny.
Thank you, Chair. As I have the dubious honour of being the longest running continuous serving member of this committee, this seems like sometimes a bit of a bad penny, but today it's a very good penny because it's a fantastic application we have in front of us. So whenever that time comes, I'd be happy to second Councillor Tolshard.
Thank you, Councillor Penny. So a bit of debate on that. I think Councillor Billings mentioned with a roof. Jim?
Just a cutting, because you've done quite a lot of talking and presenting so far. It's fairly typical just to add in including roofs. So it would be as simple as that. It wouldn't be anything more I'd add to that, unless you think there's more required. It's all external materials as described, but including roofs would be added. That's okay.
And on mine, you know, security, strengthening up the phasing. Other than that, I think the sword of Damocles has been hanging over the area for too long. This is you know, too much time's been waited and residents have been so fearful and wondering what's going to happen. And frankly, what was proposed before, you could understand why they were fearful. Councillor Billings.
Oh, as an opening comment, Chair, I'd compliment the work that's gone in by everyone concerned to get such an improved proposal. What Mr. Jones showed us on screen from where we were previously, I think you said, was it May 2021 or was it 2023? I was trying to write it down quite quickly as you were writing. 23. Well, what we saw then compared to what we've got now, the difference is very considerable, and I would compliment those that contributed to that. There aren't that many large development schemes that come before this committee where I think to myself, oh, I could live there. That looks nice. This is one of those, and so well done to that design team. I think we've got a very clear officer report in front of us. I apologise to the committee for the very extensive questions we had earlier. There are I noticed we've got in the officer report, we've got a recommendation that the final drafting of conditions should be delegated to the divisional director, and I would sort of just raise with members the line of inquiry that I was following earlier in relation to the inclusion of a condition in relation to foul drainage, and it would be my suggestion that at this stage we suggest that there's a foul drainage condition to be included, and delegate the opportunity for the divisional director not to include that condition at a later date, because I don't think doing things on the hoof in one of these meetings is best practice. And I say that just to ensure there's that chain between making sure, in the same way we've got with highways, that we've got it all done to the appropriate standard. Because I was looking, during the course of this meeting, for some appeal decisions where we've been looking for conditions on drainage, and I don't think doing it quickly during a meeting is the right way. So I would just offer up that to include that condition, but recognise the delegated authority for officers not to include it if they see fit at that later stage. And I think that's then, in my eyes, covered most of the key issues. And I would again also just encourage officers, when they're looking at the wording, to think about the need for, in say the construction management plan, to have like gully tankers down there for sucking out some of the drains, because we've got some issues where clearly this is all going to flow downhill. There's residential properties down there, but I don't think any of those detailed points take away from the substantive fact that this is a really attractive, desirable scheme, and I'd compliment those that have brought it forward.
Just one thing, the 1.2 to 1.5. Yes. We've got a proposal, 3 condition amendments. Did I make? We've got the roof, which is minor. We've got the suggested foul one. We've got the phasing. And the 1.2 to 1.5. Correct. So 4. Happy with that proposer? Happy? Seconder? Go to vote. All those in favour?
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I'll now call the meeting to the end.